I record for interesting things to put as a cold open?
This is the cold open.
We'll see. We'll have to say something funny. No pressure at all.
Something funny.
That might be the cold open. All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. Have you picked up your copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes yet? Unlock the secrets of UX success and learn all the things they don't teach you in school. Stick around until the end to find out how you can get 10% off your copy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book to pick up your copy today. This week's episode is brought to you by Figma Academy from Dive Club. Now, we usually talk soft skills here in the show, but let's not forget that hard skills are just as important too, and mastering tools like Figma is crucial. Now, in the past, we've talked about knowledge debt and how you'll pay for learning either with your time or with your money. Well, if you don't have time to learn it on your own, Figma Academy is your fast track to mastering Figma, and you'll be in good company too. Over 4,000 designers from industry leaders like Shopify, Microsoft, and Amazon have already signed up. The course is hands-on, and you'll be part of a talented cohort of designers. Plus, they host a live Q&A session every Thursday to clear up any questions that you have. You want your company to foot the bill? Well, lots of designers have done just that, and Figma Academy even offers an expense template to make it a breeze to get approval from your boss. And because you're all awesome listeners, I've teamed up with Figma Academy to offer you a $100 discount. Just head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Figma and use the promo code BeyondUX at checkout. So don't wait. Kickstart your Figma mastery journey today. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. As always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. For more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. As UX designers, if you're anything like me, you look at your calendar and you're like, I have got meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. It's a whole week of meetings. And you're thinking to yourself, when do I do my actual work? And so I've got my good buddy here, Caden Damiano. You probably recognize him from the host of the Way of Product podcast, but he's been a UX designer for a long time and he's experienced this as well. And we're going to talk today about how UX designers can take some of that time back. A lot of it could be maybe some things that we're doing, sharing too much, things like that. So we're going to talk about that in a second. I'm really excited to have Caden on the show. Caden is an interaction designer and podcast host from Utah. He currently works as a research and design lead at Produce Pay, which is the world's fastest growing ag tech company, providing a predictable e-commerce platform for produce businesses to reliably buy and sell produce, as well as get farmer-friendly financial products to grow their operations. And for the past 6 years, Caden has been running a podcast called The Way of Product. And on the podcast, he invites guests to discuss various topics related to creating products that people would want to share with their friends and colleagues. And Caden believes you can tell a product is great if it has free word-of-mouth marketing. Caden, welcome to the show, man. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
I'm just glad to be on the other side of this and not have the pressure of... It's all on you to make sure this runs well, I bet.
It's all on me? Oh, I never thought of it that way. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, I'm a guest, man. Like, I shouldn't be worrying at all. But yeah, Jeremy, thanks for having me on. You were a fantastic guest on my show, and I'm glad that we're doing an awesome crossover event of our shows.
We should do this more often, for sure.
Awesome.
So, Caden, man, I'm so excited to have you on. We're going to talk about something that I've experienced firsthand as a designer. Back when I did have a full-time job and just meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. And we're going to talk about how designers might be able to fix that, flip it a little bit, and become the trusted expert that we know that we are. So before we do that, man, I know I had that little bio, but tell us a little bit more about you and how'd you get into this and all that stuff, man.
Yeah, a lot of detours, a lot of iteration. My first major in college was English because I loved writing, I loved literature, I loved prose. And I also got married around this time in college, and I realized that I don't know if this is a great way to be a provider. I think that instinct kicks in. It's also, when you have kids, if anyone listening, you start having kids, you shift your priorities pretty fast. And
yeah, man.
So I switched over to communications. I'm like, what's writing that makes money? Okay, communications. Okay, cool. And then I'm in a 101 class, and they're going through all the emphasis or emphasize. I don't know what the plural is for that. For the communications, School of Communications, there's two things that stood out to me: the web design emphasis, and then the idea that there wasn't a lot of jobs in communication, similar to design, right? Like there's so much inventory of jobs, not enough roles to meet the demand of people that want to do the job. And they said, okay, so you need to start working on your personal brand. You got to start like a WordPress, start writing. And so I started a WordPress.com, and you find out on WordPress.com that you have to like pay to customize it. You have to buy like new themes and stuff. And so I was thinking, like, how do I do this? And so I reached out to my uncle, who pointed me towards like front-end development. I started learning front-end development, and I'm like, oh, this is actually really fun. It's like writing for the computer to understand instead of a human to understand. And so front-end development was how I started getting on the path to interaction design. And then I moved colleges to be closer to family and jobs, and switch into information systems because I was like, I actually want to get into this tech thing, but like, what's tech in business? And then another mentor said, oh, information systems. Did a semester that, hated it. It was terrible. But not because information systems is a bad field. It's just information systems is managing the things other people design. Right. And so these are like Salesforce solution architects that come out of these degrees. But you aren't creating the information system. You are working within the constraints of someone else's information system. So one day I'm really depressed, and I'm like, man, I just can't find anything that really clicks for me. And then I was going through the course catalog, and in the W section, there was this new degree as of 2015. This is 2016 when I was reading the course catalog. I went to Utah Valley University, and they created an interaction design major, which for those who don't know what interaction design is, it's the discipline. And I beat this drum pretty hard on LinkedIn that I don't believe that UX is a discipline. I believe it's a competency because it requires taste and judgment to be good at UX. Like you can't call it a discipline because you can't evaluate it. If it was a really discipline, it'd be easier to hire junior talent because there would be like junior level UX stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This is like where the Don Normans, the guy that did the Humane Smart Chip, AI chip, he was an interaction designer on the original iPhone team. How does a human interact with a computer system? That's interaction design. I found it. It was the most fun major I could have imagined enjoying. We learned UX principles. We learned about facilitation. Ironically, I didn't know product management was even a role. When I was in school, I just thought product management, the competency of identifying trade-offs and prioritizing how to phase the design of your product, I thought that's like what a good interaction designer did. I didn't know that there's like a single job family that just did that. And so I learned a lot of product management in school. And I guess that's because that was my professor's bias. I mean, he's a career professor. He's tenure. He doesn't know about product management. Like when he was in the industry, it was just engineers ran everything, right?
Right.
Long story short, because my journey into product design was an odyssey. I just was willing to change my mind a lot, change my opinions on what I wanted to do. And I got really lucky and found a 4-year degree that actually focused on like the field of UX and software.
Yeah, it's interesting that topic that you just brought up about what interaction design is versus UX. That could be an entire topic on its own, dude. Honestly, it's in my book. I actually have like a whole chapter about what is UX, and it's really just the experience a user has. That's really what UX is, right? And so when you think about UX design, it's kind of, it's funny and sort of it's a lot of hubris in assuming that we can actually design the experience a user has.
We can fabricate.
Right. Yeah. We can't fabricate the experience a user has alone, as a UX designer. I mean, it's like so many other things involved in creating a really great experience, right? Anyway, yeah, that's really cool, man. That's a fascinating journey. I love that you've been thinking too about like product management and how that kind of ties in. And, there's so much overlap between designers and product managers. And, in the zeitgeist right now, there's this, like a fight between, one and the other. And it's just a really interesting time, I think, to be building software. But I want to talk about today, man. I want to talk about the actual job of a designer. A lot of times feels like we're meeting. I used to joke that I was a professional meter in my last role because I just met so much. And And really, we got to figure out like how to take that time back, right? And you had some really interesting ideas. I want to get your thoughts there. First off, you brought up this idea when we talked a few months back. Designers are spending too much time in meetings. I'm curious from your perspective, why is that the case? How did that happen? How did we get there?
Most of your audiences are designers, so it's like me being like a liberal going on Bill Maher. Like the audience is already rigged, so maybe I might not get in trouble for saying stuff.
We don't judge you. No tarring and feathering on this show.
I like to consider myself an armchair anthropologist. From an ethnography perspective, we equate getting in a room and working it out or talking it out as the work and knowledge work. And here's my current thesis. A lot of product managers who are in charge of discovering the requirements, or like, I guess, discovering what needs to be in the requirements, they come from either management consulting backgrounds, Scrum backgrounds, like ex-engineers, fields that are not about showing work in progress and product development. It's all about not showing work in progress work and showing the final solution that they made in a vacuum. And so let me, to illustrate this point, in my career, we met this former Bain consultant, and he was a part of the executive team at one of the companies I worked for. He was seeing how we were conducting research, and he's just like, hey, I really, really admire how you guys perform research. Like, you're trying to really find out like what the root cause is and stuff. One of my coworkers who was running that research project at the time said, what are you talking about? Like you said that like at Bain, you did a bunch of research. Like you even told us we're not moving fast enough on research one time. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, oh, well, we already have like an opinion on like what we're going to tell the client. We just do the research to like back up our opinion. Straight up Bain consultant. Yeah, dude. Management consulting is a racket. And we have all these like people that would have been management consultants, which really like who are management consultants are people that go into management consultancies. They're high achieving, over anxious young adults, directionless young adults that think that what's like a high status job, management consulting or investment banking. And now there's this cool new job in tech called product manager where you don't need to be technical apparently to join it. Well, and then also those people tend to end up being executives at companies. And so culture comes from the top. A lot of like MBAs, they run the traditional corporate meeting. They're not good facilitators of like group participatory decision making. We think that the corporate meeting, like this is just the way it is. There's, I think, like a habituation factor in there that we have to like meet synchronously in order to get stuff done with like modern technology and everything like that. Like, I just don't believe that. And I honestly think we spend more time talking about work than actually getting work done.
Yeah. So we've got these meetings, man. And I feel like part of our problem too is as designers, like, would you maybe agree with this? I'm curious what you think, but it's kind of like our fault. We go out and we just sort of like want people to see all the work. Like we talk about show the value and prove your worth and all this stuff. So we're like, well, let's have a meeting and let me show you all the things I'm doing and let me show you this and let me show you that. And we try to show like how the sausage is made in a way. And we end up putting all these meetings together, or, you know, people, we maybe we don't put the meetings together, but we encourage, or what's the right word for that? Like we
enable it. We're enablers.
Enable it. Yes, exactly.
Because we want to see at the table.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about that? I'm curious. Is that something you've been thinking about? Do you think partly on us because of how we work and how we've been told we're supposed to work maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to use armchair therapist speak. If you don't place boundaries, you're going to get walked all over. So there was I saw this TikTok. It was like this private equity guy that seemed like a human. So I like his content. He provides career advice, and he was talking about people that said, kind of push back on his, you own your calendar. And then he gets like these comments, and someone said, oh, that's easy for you to say. Like, you're the boss. Like, I have a terrible boss. I don't own my calendar. And he's like, but you do. Let's say that someone comes to you and says, hey, can you go to this meeting that's 2:30 to 4 o'clock today? And if you look at your calendar and you're available and your default answer is yes, that's your fault. And so the alternative is saying, like looking at the content of the meeting or the agenda and saying, oh, is this a higher priority than what I'm working on right now? I think as designers, we feel like, well, flip side anthropological perspective, a lot of people like get into software product design. I'm not going to call it UX. It's not. It's a competency. Software product design, you want to work on making SaaS products or building software that enables service delivery. A lot of people get into it from like the graphic design or industrial design field. And I'm not saying this isn't wrong. I'm just calling out like there's a huge gap in competency from these disciplines coming over into systems design, because you go from designing like a one-off object where you're probably not actually working with the electrical engineer to make the gadget. Unless you're at Apple, then you're very deep in that. And then ideally you should be working with electrical engineers. You should be working with the breadboard prototypes as like an industrial designer. A lot of the ones I met, it's more about, form and making the product more approachable, and then kind of letting like the electrical engineering team decide what the value delivery is. So we're like, it's more of packaging, like the shell design. And so coming into this, it's like, oh, cool. Making 2D interfaces way easier. And it is objectively. Like, I mean, I think people that could do like 3D printing, making 3D objects and having taste of like how to bezel something for a physical object is an incredible discipline, and it's needed. But when you go into software design, you're not designing an object, you're designing a system that's doing something on behalf of the customer. Like you're automating manual tasks. And so a lot of the designers I met that come from like graphic or industrial design fields, they got into it because they love the craft. And one of the first guests of my show, JB Chakowski, he's currently the global head of design for QuickBooks. So I imagine that means that he everyone that works on QuickBooks all around the world reports up to him now for design and brand. So JB said that designers give up their seat at the table for craft. And then they think that like they could just show up to the table and bring their craft with them, and that's like what justifies their seat at the table. The table means you're making prioritization decisions, you're having critical debate, you are deciding how you resource things, and that craft expertise on how to use a tool or how to replicate like a certain result in a design software doesn't really translate into the running of a business skill set.
That's really interesting. That's like a fascinating way to put it, because there's an opportunity cost there. Just like you said, if you want to see the table, it requires these meetings where we discuss these things. That's an opportunity cost. That means you will not have the time to do the work, right? And so it's funny because you always hear, this is like my complaint professional meter. I'm like, when am I going to do my actual work? And I think you're right. Like, it's kind of interesting. Like we always talk about, getting my calendar back. And when you look at someone's calendar and it's empty, that doesn't mean they aren't doing anything. It just means they don't have a meeting at that point. And it's kind of, I don't know, ironic, like that example. I don't know, ironic might be the wrong word. But when you think about that guy that you're talking about on TikTok or whatever, and they're like, yeah, can you make this meeting? Are you free in the afternoon? And your calendar is open and you just say yes. What are you not doing instead? And I think that's something that most designers probably just don't even think about. They just look like, oh yeah, I'm free 2 p.m., whatever. And it's that context switching too. Even if it's like a 30-minute meeting, you've got to stop a little bit before that. You got to get back into the flow, whatever. You're already at an hour that you've lost for a 30-minute meeting. We don't really think about that, and that enabling piece that we just say, yeah, I can go. That's on us.
It's a prioritization decision. Let's use the example of like, what is an engineer? We hire a bunch of software engineers, but they're not like the engineers in Apollo 13, like solving problems and like being proactive, and failure isn't an option. You give them an experience and they're like, oh, we can't do that. The architecture doesn't support it, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, the people that do that, they're not engineers, they're programmers. They know how to program a computer, but they're only as good as the requirements you give them. At one company I was working at, this guy even like nicknamed himself Coder in Slack. He just loved the craft of coding. He was longtime IC, never went to management, had a ton of time in the industry, ton of experience, but for what good was it? Because every time I'm like, okay, this load time's not fast enough. The PM's like, hey, how do we like fix this experience? And they're talking about like using copy and stuff. And I'm like, just make it faster. It's a bad experience because it's fast. You don't need a better loading state. You need a faster system. And we're just pulling records from a database and putting it into a list view. And he's like, oh, we can't do that. Another software engineer, he figured it out in an afternoon. He thought like, oh, what an interesting problem. And he fixed the engineering and it made a better UX. And it made that coder guy look really stupid. And so most people that we think are engineers are just programmers. They are waiting for requirements, waiting to be told what to do. I think ProducePay is the first company I've been to where it's like real capital E engineers, where like table stakes is knowing how to program and like the tech, like knowing how to interact with technology. But the real magic is the solutions architecture The thing that they do that I've never seen an engineering group do is, one, culturally, it's a philosophical thing. They think agile's stupid. They bristle at the term best practice. And every engineering lead of a project has to write something called a technical design document, where they write this huge confluence doc of how they're going to execute the engineering. And then they do a critique session with all the engineers and they go over the document.
Oh, wow.
So they see it as a design problem, which it is. How you engineer the thing, there is a design aspect of it. And when you look at the design profession, product design profession, it started in the engineering building department at Stanford. Like, design was a function of engineering. Design thinking was invented by engineers. And so it really comes down to, like, engineering is more of like a state of mind. It's not a discipline per se, right? It's like engineering is like UX. You could be a great programmer, but not a great engineer, because you're not solving problems, right? And so you could be a great illustrator, you could be a great interaction designer, you could be a fantastic UI designer, you could be a fantastic information architect. But what really makes you a product designer or UX designer is the ability to harness a bunch of different disciplines, systems think, and actually solve problems. In order to solve problems, you need to be able to identify trade-offs. One category of trade-offs that's really important is how you spend your time. And it's like, how does me spending an hour in this meeting help me solve this specific problem for the customer? The topic of this meeting, is it going to give me what I need to make design a better experience? No? Okay, I'm not going to this meeting.
So that's interesting, because you just point out something I think I want to dig into this a little bit more. When we talk about the meetings and we talk about saying yes to all these meetings and not really putting on that sort of critical thinking hat and saying, like, is this meeting something I should be going to? Is this a good use of my time? You made the distinction between engineers and UX designers and the others that are doing just the high craft. Is there a correlation from your head, in your point of view, from like those people who are really good, like capital E engineers, UX designers, that people that understand the problem solving aspect of it, versus the really great UI designers, really great interaction designers, really great coders, where they assume that the craft is something that they will just be able to use and influence. And so, like, are we going to those meetings to just like show the craft, to show all the work that we've done and say, look at me, take me seriously, versus like actually standing up and being a sort of leader, maybe, for lack of a better term? Is there a correlation there?
Yeah. Well, how does it feel when you go into a meeting and the person holding that meeting is like, hey, I want to brainstorm, like I want to collaborate. But whenever you bring up a concern, they just brush it off. They're like, oh yeah, we're not talking about that right now. And then you think like, well, you just said that we're going to talk and just work it out. You are not listening to any of the concerns of your peers. Are we really collaborating if you're just talking at me and giving lip service to collaboration? Like, that's not how group dynamics work. If the only contribution to a meeting from the designer is, oh, cool, I'll make some wireframes. Oh, here's some wireframes. Oh, here's a cool experience design. And you're like, it's like a pitch meeting for the designer. Then they just stop inviting the designer to those meetings. And I think this is the reason why design isn't like invited to a lot of rooms where it happens, to use a Hamilton reference. It is like, oh, like when I bring the designer, they just derail the conversation and talk at us. Now, if a meeting is important, like it's talking about the direction of an initiative that you're responsible for an experience initiative, you should be listening, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. You should be engaging with the opinions of others. If they have a strong point of view, you should say, oh, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, you're trying to like seek to understand and then also make them feel understood, right? There's a great quote that I heard. I heard it from like Alex Ramosi, but you probably heard it from someone else, that the goal of great writing is to be understood. The goal of copywriting is to feel understood. Really good executive presence in a meeting makes everyone feel like they've been understood by you, right? It's like, so what you're saying is this, okay, oh, dumb question. If you didn't have this thing, how does it prevent you from doing your job? And then they start giving you anecdotes of like how they can't do their job without this thing. And then you're like, oh, okay, I can see why this is important to you. And then you're now a more informed designer, and your recommended design is actually going to solve a problem.
It's interesting too, thinking about like, as you're kind of explaining your thought process here on like how we have these people, these high craft individuals, maybe we'll call them, like all these people. And, I feel like there is, I've seen that too, that like talking at the team showing them this thing, saying, but look all the work I did. Researchers do the same thing a lot too. Like what we talked to 5,000 people and we did 800,000 minutes of things and we've got 1 million artifacts in the 200-page deck. How could you not take this seriously? And I think that's a really great way to look at it. I hadn't really thought about that before, that sort of correlation between like high craft versus the problem-solving aspect and being two very different things. And I think that is something I see quite a bit.
I'm going to go on the record and say everything I'm about to say is my personal opinion on how I like to work, because it's fun to work this way. You get more time to like actually making a difference this way. This is my personal opinion. To listeners who are bristling at, oh, I'm poo-pooing the craft. I'm not. I'm just saying the craft is the bar. The craft doesn't get you paid more. The craft puts you on a salary ladder. And so when you talk about high craft, the word I use is discipline. Like you're a master at a discipline. Like a blacksmith is a master at shaping metal. A graphic designer is a master at visual communication and layout and typography. I would argue that a UX designer that isn't multidisciplinary has like a competency in several, at least a couple disciplines like information architecture and layout and design, isn't going to do well in this field, or isn't going to be seen as influential in an organization, and also not going to have a lot of decision-making power. They're going to be told what to do a lot. So the discipline, which is something that you could actually objectively assess, right? Like, hey, is this a person a junior, a mid, a senior? You measure the discipline. You don't measure their UX taste. Like, I don't know how you do that, like without like a portfolio and like, a track record. For the opposite discipline is a competency. And a competency is like your judgment, your decision-making, your taste. Steve Jobs talks about that making great products takes taste. And in order to get taste, you need to make mistakes and try stuff out. There is kind of like a seniority to competency. There's a master apprenticeship power dynamic here, which I think we should bring back, right? Like you should be studying under a master if you want to be a great product designer. That's part of why I started my podcast in the first place. It used to be called The Way of Product Design. It's allowed me to like hear the mental models of other people. People that optimize their career on a discipline, you're going to max out your salary cap. But what makes like a staff and engineer or staff designer? It's about competency. Either you go into management or you go into staff. Either go into management because you've maxed out your earning potential. And I think management is an important discipline that is needed because, ICs need to feel like they're unlocking the work. But if you want to continue solving problems as an IC and make more money, it's about becoming more competent, having a track record of good judgment. That's different. Like there's diminishing returns at getting better at a discipline. It's what you can do with the discipline. So here's a great example. Look at millionaire portrait photographers. Oh, they're masters of the portrait photography business, but people hire them for the brand. Christopher Nolan, master filmmaker, amazing at the craft, but it's his decision-making that creates this certain like texture to his films that people recognize. And Hans Zimmer, master of his craft, understands how to make sounds into melodies and understands how to use pitch to evoke emotion. He's hired because he's Hans Zimmer, right? Like you're hiring the competency of an individual. Like this is where you start developing your personal brand. That's how you make more money, is being more competent.
I feel like a lot of junior designers, they assume that to get promoted, to get more like a seat at the table, I have to be better at this, I have to be better at that. But being better at those things is, like you said, I think that's a really great way to put it, the bar, the table stakes. Like you've got to be really good at your craft to then be taken seriously so that you can inform decisions. I don't think anybody is going to come in to a meeting and say like, I'm going to make all these decisions. Look at me. You could be the most influential person in the world, I think. But like, if you don't have that high craft to back it up and you're not good at that discipline or multiple disciplines, as you're saying, like, is your team really going to ever take you seriously? And I would argue probably not. I don't think, unless those other people have no idea. Maybe that's possible. You're on a team of incompetent people that have no clue. But I think for the most part, people are going to see that and they're going to say like, you're really good at these things. And just like you said, like if Hans Zimmer didn't know how to do these things and compose music, it doesn't matter what's in his head.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how cool his ideas are, right?
Right. He can't bring them to life. And I think that's something that's really interesting. And I want to kind of tie that back to, though, this idea, because I think there is a correlation here between like getting your time back and being stuck in these meetings And I feel like there is, maybe help me talk about this a little bit. From your perspective, like those people that are really good at your craft, like they mastered the discipline, when they are getting bombarded with meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings, what do they do to push back on that? Is it a simple no, or is there something else? Because often these product managers, they're asking for deliverables, or they're asking for a thing. How do you get your time back? What do you do?
What's a product manager, which, despite all the trash talking on the job family product management I do on the internet, it is an essential competency that is needed if you're going to make great software. But here's the thing, like even Silicon Valley Product Group says, like, who's the product manager? It's the person that knows the most about the product, which could be the engineer, it could be the designer. So product management is kind of being practiced by a lot of people. I'm going to do a reverse Uno reverse card and say that everybody could be a product manager. You just have to be knowledgeable about the product and like have an opinion about where to go. But what's a product manager asking for? Like, what's their job to be done? What makes it a hard job is that you're not doing the work, but you're responsible for the outcome of the work. That's what makes product management probably one of the highest churn job families I've ever seen. Like I have run out of fingers of how many product managers I've seen exited, like product executives, ICs get fired, because it's 100% competency-based role. It's about influencing people. What they're looking for in those meetings, when they can't control the outcome by doing the work. And I know this because the most desperate product managers will start making wireframes because how desperate they are. Like, I just want this, right? They're looking for certainty. I've had a product manager actually, I don't know how she got edit access, update my design file. Oh, wow. Because she was like so desperate. They're looking for certainty. They're looking for reasons to trust you. And how designers present themselves in meetings, like their executive presence. And an executive, I mean, what's an executive? Your job as an executive is to execute, is to ensure execution, right? And so that's what executive presence means, is like, what's the confidence you instill in how you carry yourself in a meeting? And this is something that I'm thinking a lot about. Designers don't have executive presence. They're just like, just tell me what to do. Oh, man, you're so out of touch. You're like, they're talking at the PM. They're judging them instead of asking thoughtful questions and trying to understand, diagnose before you just prescribe. We're jumping into prescribe mode. Like, this is not the right way to do it. It's like the worst engineers do it too. Like, hey, this isn't the right way to engineer it. And it's like, by what metric? Like, what do you mean the right way? Oh, well, it's best practice. Well, hey, whoa, best practice isn't a strategy. So diagnose, like, what does a doctor do? They're like, okay, where does it hurt? Okay, how bad does it hurt? Scale of 1 to 10. Okay, so what you're saying is you have a stomach ache, it's a sharp pain right around here. Okay, I have a hunch that it's your appendix. And then they run a series of tests to like make sure that's the right thing before they cut you open or give you like a pill. At least the best doctors do that. We need more of that from designers. Like, you're an expert. Your job is to execute, provide specs to engineers. You prescribing before you even understand the problem doesn't make you a designer, it makes you a guesser. And so product managers will take over your calendar. They'll put more meetings on your calendar because they don't feel certain that you're going to get the job done.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think, like, from my experience, like you said, they're nervous that they aren't getting what they need. So they're going to have meetings to follow up to ask you. Or, they might have a bunch of meetings. They might also just be pinging you all the time, constantly, right? But I think that's a really interesting thing. And it's like, the worst product managers that I've worked with, they communicate in the meetings, and they use the meetings to get status updates from other people, right? Instead of actively going out, they'll say, well, we'll have a meeting on Friday, and just everybody, I'll go around the room. You, where's this? You, where's that? You, where's this? You, where's that? Instead of, actively communicating with their team and having one-off conversations, they are adding meetings to get status updates. They might want to do like some kind of co-designed thing because they don't trust you that you're doing it on your own. I think that's like the trust piece, like you mentioned, is such a big thing. And I think, like, for me personally, one of the things like I advocate all the time is building up a relationship with your product team partners, with your engineering partners, whoever it is, and having one-on-one conversations on a regular basis and getting a sense for like what they're worried about. What are they nervous about? We talk about empathy for users. This is a really great example, like empathy for your product team to understand, what are they concerned with? What are the pressures are they under? Who's asking them for stuff? Because a lot of times you never really figure that out. They're just coming in and they're saying, I need it by Friday. And they're not telling you, like, some other person asked me for something. It's like, all right, well, like, that's unreasonable. Let's talk about how we could get that person asking you for something else sooner or later or whatever, something different. So that you aren't under this pressure anymore. And it makes your working relationship like so much better. And I've also found that you can decrease the amount of meetings that you have on a regular basis because you're sharing these things more consistently spread out over time versus having a bunch of meetings.
Yeah. People that tend to have a lot more like free time, they're the high trust individuals in the company. There's this really great maxim that frames a lot of my philosophy on this. Amateurs try to do it right. Professionals make sure that it doesn't fail. Amateurs try to do it right. Professionals make sure it doesn't fail. What do you think? Like Hans Zimmer has a bunch of like collab meetings with Christopher Nolan while making the soundtrack. All Chris had to do is go to Hans Zimmer. This is one meeting and said, "Hey, I can't tell you the plot of the story. Like I can't give you the details of the plot, but it's a story about a father and his daughter being separated by duty and separated by like time and space, but how love connects them together." Hans Zimmer just went off and he's like, "Okay, cool." Comes back. Chris is like, "This is it."
Yeah, right.
Well, like no content. Chris just gave him the job to be done. And then Hans Zimmer comes back with a fantastic score. Just understanding the theme of the movie, the skeleton of the movie, that was enough for a master craftsperson and composer. A composer is a competency. It's not a craft. Being a composer requires playing the orchestra, writing the music, creating the orchestra. So I would say that a composer is like the analog to engineer or product designer. You get less meetings when you with great results. How do you get great results? You listen. You make them feel seen, heard, understood. Now, a part of that is like, if you need like 50 people to feel seen, heard, understood, that's where great group facilitation skills come into play, designing and running great workshops. What I do personally is I'll do micro workshops. And because, to your point, you mentioned a lot of how PMs operate is they use stand-ups to get what they need. And they even like hijack the meeting to like extract value from the team members so that they know what to put in the PRD. So they're like the scribe of the PRD, but they're trying to tell us what to do, but they're asking us what to do so that they can write in the PRD so they could tell us what to do. It's like bass backwards. And so it's like, it's a waste of time. Like a 50-person 1-hour meeting is a waste of most of those people's time because only like 1 or 2 stakeholders are going to get their concerns resolved, if any. I would rather do 20 hours of 30-minute meetings with 40 people, one-on-one, make sure that every person feels seen, heard, understood. And so like one thing I'm doing, shout out Sophia Prater, Object-Oriented UX. She'd be a great guest on the show if she hasn't been already.
I haven't talked to her yet. She's on my list long term. I definitely want to talk to her at some point. But
I'll help you make it happen. It was a fantastic episode. It's coming out in a couple weeks as of recording this. And she came up with this framework, Object-Oriented UX. It's like kind of like a middle diamond and the double diamond framework where you actually define the structure of the system before you start doing interaction design and ideation. And there's this artifact called an object map. Now, the reason I do this like roadshow format, instead of doing like, oh, we need to do a design sprint and like get a bunch of people's calendars cleared and stuff, that's just not practical and like a normal iterative long-term product. I think design sprints have their place, but the reason that the design sprint is the way it is because it was a venture capital firm that needed a week with their startups they invested in. And they only had a week and they had to do it within a week. We have years. If you're like in-house, you have years. Like you don't need to do like block off everyone's calendar or tell them the value design sprints or other methodologies. I think we've already established this. I don't believe you get alignment through the typical corporate meeting. You also don't get alignment through documentation, which goes to the researcher example that you said. They publish the research report like it's an academic paper. They have an abstract and like methodology and stuff like that. The problem is that documentation is basically saying, I've already made a decision. You can't change anything. This is my recommendation. So there's no negotiation there. Like documentation doesn't align people because it's like there's no chance the documentation is going to change. I believe that alignment comes through people going on the same journey. That's why we have like buddy cop films are fun. They're relatable. Is that two opposite people from different perspectives go on an adventure together. They go through the same journey and then they discover friendship at the end. I'm being cheesy, but like and facetious, but it's true. It's a human yearning. Like they want to feel like they're being brought along. And so methodology, people using the same methodology creates alignment. If you're using the same vocabulary, using the same game board, right? If you're playing 2 different games, there's no way you're going to align. Frank Lloyd Wright, the prolific architect, he's a good example of like a master craftsperson, but is hired for his competencies. People want a Frank Lloyd Wright custom home. So an architect is a competency. The reason, and that's why people are like, oh, I wanted to go to architecture school, but it's going to take forever to design your own buildings. Why? because you're not an architect when you start out of architecture school. You're a drafter. You're doing CAD models. You're executing someone else's vision. You're not an architect. And what he will do when he's working with billionaires on designing their second, third homes or their dream house is he'll take them into a studio and you'll have these different size wooden blocks. And so this is a methodology, for the pop quiz at the end. This is a methodology. He lays out the house with them. Like, hey, where do you want the master bedroom? Like, where do you want? Oh, you want a courtyard here? Okay, where do you want the master bedroom? Where are the kids' rooms going to be? How do you want to face this to the beach? You want a nice bay windows? Okay, we'll just kind of open up this, it's like wireframing.
Yeah.
And he said, and then this is all they need to know. Okay, Frank, go do your work. We'll see you in a few weeks. He just says, hey, they need to feel like they helped build it with you.
Yes.
So I'll meet with if there's 20 people, I'll meet with 20 people one-on-one. If there's 40 people, I'll do it. And that's just the way I do it. This isn't a best practice. This is a strategy. And I feel like it works very well because I could get someone's time for 30 minutes to onboard them into a methodology document, like an object map. Teach them what it means. Get them excited about why we're doing it. And then teach them how to use Figma comments to asynchronously keep the conversation going. So for example, I went to a head of compliance one time. I taught her how to read the artifact. And I'm like, hey, I don't expect you to consume this. You don't have to consume this. If you do, brownie points. All I need from you is I need you to know how to orient yourself when I pull you in. And I teach her how to use Figma comments and stuff. When I ping you on Figma, and here's how to set the Slack comments so that you could get Slack notifications when I ping you in Figma, just jump in, orient yourself. Okay, where am I in this? Okay, we're talking about this. Okay, cool. Here's my answer thread. Boom. I didn't put another meeting on her calendar. She's the head of compliance. She's busy. I did that with a bunch of people. And then we had this big sales kickoff meeting where most of the operations side of the business was in seminars all week long. It was a big offsite. And a lot of the people at that offsite were key stakeholders in a project I was working on. But because I did the legwork to get everybody into an asynchronous methodology using the same vocabulary, talking about things, I was still able to get my work done that week. And then other designers, other product managers were like, oh man, it was so hard to get anything done. Everyone was and yeah, it's because you try to get your job through meetings. Your methodology is a vanilla corporate meeting. Of course you're not going to get anything done.
Well, the interesting thing too here, and I just want to call this out, I think this is worth noting. It's you use the example of I'd rather have 40, 30-minute meetings than one giant hour-long meeting with 50 people. And it's not that you are removing the events from your calendar. It's that those meetings become more impactful and meaningful. And I would rather have 40 hours of meetings over the course of a week that are actually valuable and contribute back to my work, or I contribute in some meaningful way, versus 20 hours of meetings where they were completely useless and a waste of my time. I think that's a really interesting thing to note. The point isn't necessarily to clear your calendar. The point is to make those meetings that you do have more valuable and meaningful. And this is something we talked a little bit about this a minute ago, but I want to maybe tie this back in, is thinking about when to say no to a meeting. What method do you use to determine if a meeting is something you should be going to and accepting or not, to take that power back?
Let's define what having a seat at the table is. And then I'll go over some heuristics that I use to get myself out of meetings. Mitch Clements, he's fantastic. I think everyone knows who Mitch is. He's phenomenal.
Yellow background guy on LinkedIn.
Yeah, he's a LinkedIn design influencer. He works for Encino as of this recording. Fun fact, he was almost my boss.
Oh, really?
I got this opportunity to do research in Spanish. I speak Spanish at Produce Pay for Oh, wow. I got 2 offers.
Fluent Spanish?
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
I am I'm proficient, professional language. I talk to customers in Spanish. I've been to Mexico and Peru. That opportunity came up when I got an offer to work with Mitch. So Mitch, I love that guy. He would have been an amazing boss, and it doesn't mean we might not work together in the future. It was just I'm like, Mitch, I'm so sorry. This seems like a once in a career opportunity. And he's like, dude, you'd be stupid not to do it. So he was super he was a class act when I had to not work with him.
When I had to not work with him.
Yeah, because I know how hard it is to hire designers.
Yeah, it is.
When you find someone, you're like, well, we're vibing, we're going to crush it together. And then they get a better offer. How demoralizing that is.
Sure,
but he's such a champ. And also he has such an amazing brand. He has the cream of the crop, pick from like LinkedIn. But he talked about how he did a similar thing that I did, which basically validated how I felt about work, where he's just like, oh, the bar for designers is so low that getting what people want is actually pretty fast. Like you get that done pretty fast. So like basically what he did was to free up his calendar strategically is he like, Mitch, like you're a rock star. This story is amazing. So over the course of 4 years, instead of doing like big meetings, big like demo reveals, he would do what the PMs asked him to do, which to make like a pretty usable interface, and like like usually PMs aren't asking for much. You deliver what they want, and then he spend his free time concepting the future of Simple Nexus, which was the startup that he exited. He would just meet with people one-on-one over 4 years, just saying, hey, well, man, what if we did this? What if we did this? Like bring him along for the ride, like get him excited. Like, hey, I'm bringing you in because I value your opinion. What do you think about this? Eventually the CEO and like a lot of the executive leadership team start seeing these like concepts and they're like, why aren't we doing this?
Yeah. And then they go back down. I mean, like telling the product managers, what the hell? We got these ideas. You're not doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Like you've seen these designs, you don't want to like execute them. And so Mitch said, instead of going to the table, we just created our own table.
I love
and
that,
so
dude.
When you think of like the metaphor of like holding court, it's usually like kind of high status individual, and then everyone is around the table for that high status individual. Now, this is a strategy. This is like a way to like approach work. This isn't like a best practice. It requires a lot of great handle on communication skills to pull it off. But why go to someone else's table if the person running that table is not making the best prioritization decisions? Instead, try to be the cool kids. Have people want to talk to the designers. That means like influencing them. So how do you say no? Well, one great strategy is bring people along for the ride, right? Because if they already feel like they trust you and they understand how you're framing a problem, if you like walk them through a methodology, like you proactively set up the meeting with them and you teach them the methodology, you just decided that, no, I'm the table, right? You come to me and you frame how they think about the problem. And then they come to you and they're like, oh yeah, like I want to talk to you about it. Then you start getting invited to meetings. That's not you getting a seat at the table. That's them coming to your table to invite you to the meeting. How do you say no? You set up a different meeting before that dumb meeting. Give them an update, you resolve their concerns, and then say like, hey, after that meeting, they feel good. Like, oh man, like I'm buddies with like the designer, man, like I get all my stuff built. Then when that meeting comes up on the calendar, I could just Slack them and say, oh, hey man, like I'm working on X and X thing. I was going to use this hour to do it. Can you cover for me in that meeting? And so instead of saying no, it's like, hey, can you cover for me? Can you let me know what happened? It's like kind of more of like verbal jujitsu. It's like, you don't have to say no. There's a couple of like great stories. So there's this book called Eccentric Orbits. My dad is a satellite network engineer. He designs satellite systems so that rich people in private jets could have Netflix and go on stream Teams calls. But he has this book about the guy that saved the Iridium satellite network. So for those who don't know what Iridium is, it's this satellite constellation that was developed by Motorola, and and this is like a really great design case study in the concept of engineering is that satellite phones didn't work well because we followed like a different the concept of just following the latitude, right? Like the horizontal lines. And so like the coverage over an area is actually like not as reliable because the Earth is an oval. It's fat. So like you lose coverage. The Iridium satellites, they did an eccentric orbit where they just did random orbits all around the globe, usually through the poles, like north and south poles. And that led to more reliable coverage. Building a satellite network, very expensive. So they were about to decommission it because, a bunch of MBAs, VPs at Motorola were like, yeah, this isn't profitable. Let's kill it, blah, blah, blah. This retired Pan Am CEO sees it. He saw the customer experience problem. Navy SEALs were using Iridium phones to make calls in the middle of like Afghanistan. Like mountain climbers on Everest use the phones to get rescued, right? So he goes and saves it. And so the story is of him like trying to turn it around and like acquire it and like find investors to like save the Iridium satellite constellation. Spoiler alert, he does save it. But there's this great story where he's in the meeting at the Motorola campus, this like very like corporate headquarters, all these guys in boxy like suits and stuff, VPs, and they're like telling him like, you need to do this, 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 and this. Oh, this is a dumb idea. They're like posturing and grandstanding. And how it's described in the book is he has this, the yellow line stationary like paper, and he's just writing down notes. And he's like, okay, I understand. Okay, so what you're saying is this. And then he doesn't say anything. He just takes it. Because deep down he believed nothing that these VPs says is going to change the outcome. But he focused on making them feel understood. because that's all. Like anyone grandstanding just wants to feel validated. So quickest way to disarm someone that's like making noise, just say, okay, cool. Like, yeah, you seem stressed about this. Okay. Yeah. So this is what you like you're concerned about? Cool. And then he just ignored it. He just made him feel heard.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
here's the thing, that like those VPs are full of shit because he did not apply anything that they said in the eventual solution. And they didn't even remember what they said because they didn't bring it up later. And that's most people in corporate America. They're just posturing. And so sometimes you just have to like disarm them, make them feel seen, heard, and understood. And then you go do the thing that you think is right because you're the designer, you're the problem solver. Like just make people feel like, okay, they're validated. Sometimes what they say is actually a really great perspective and you should listen. But that's up to judgment. You can't really train that,
Well, the other thing too, I was just thinking about a lot of these meetings that we have where we just, used a good example a second ago of the big reveal, right? And I failed miserably, absolutely miserably in a previous role because we did that. We had executives and we waited until the last minute and we showed them this big thing and we spent 2 hours pitching this in a big meeting and they went and they did their own thing and they ignored it completely. And that was on us because what we weren't doing was having these smaller meetings leading up to that bigger meeting to make sure we knew what we were getting into. We could have known well in advance they were never going to change their mind. We could have maybe, like you said, brought them along and had them think it was their idea the whole time, and have them help come up with something so that we didn't have to pitch. We wouldn't have needed this 2-hour-long pitch meeting. And I think that's something like if you're waiting until that you're having these big meetings, these big reveals, these big showing off my designs and look how cool this was. If you're waiting until that meeting and you don't know what the input is going to be from these other people in those meetings, you are setting yourself up for failure. And it's those little one-on-one meetings that you have throughout the course of the quarter, the year, whatever. You should know well in advance. And those people going into those meetings well in advance should know already what's coming. It shouldn't be a surprise. And, you're being more strategic, again, about the time you're spending in meetings. It's not like you're never going to get rid of meetings, right? We're never going to have a time where we have 0 days on our calendar booked with meetings. But we should be more strategic and thoughtful about the meetings that we're having and making sure that they're actually producing some positive outcome for us and for everybody, really, not just us. But anyway, I love that idea, though. That's just something like, I think most junior designers, especially, just like you said before, they'll go into the meeting, they'll show all the cool stuff they did, and then expect that design to speak for itself. And it's not going to. It's definitely not going to.
Yeah. So that's another thing, right? This idea of work speaking for itself. Now, what does that mean? Work speaks for itself. I think we look at a lot of auteurs, which an auteur in film, and I use the film metaphor a lot because that's kind of, I loved making movies in high school, and I loved the craft of like storytelling. And I think that served me well here in the long term. I mean, obviously, I was an English major. Like I was going to write scripts one day. So not tour and film, like a Christopher Nolan or like a Martin Scorsese. Is really like a multidisciplinary filmmaker. Bradley Cooper just did it with Maestro, where he directed it, he acted in it, he produced it. Multidisciplinary. That's what auteur is. Like you're able to control like a lot of like the key levers of like what creates like a sense of feeling and style. And then also auteurs tend to have like a crew with them, right? Like they use the same cinematographer every time. People will like say like, oh, Christopher Nolan's work speaks for itself. And I'm like, well, if you didn't know who Christopher Nolan was, would it speak for itself? And so when people's work that like the people whose work speaks for themselves usually having a fantastic personal brand. And so like that, it's a brand thing. My idea of brand is how does someone make you feel? Like do you inspire people? Auteurs, they inspire people. That's part of their brand. Yeah, and so it's not about the work speaking for itself. It's the fact that they love the artist. They love the artist so much that they don't care how the art was made. They'll buy the art. And so instead of trying to like have your work speak for itself and like create these like spend all this time making these really fancy decks showing like your process, all the sketches you made. And this also applies to junior designers trying to break in the industry, like your portfolios. The behind the scenes like documentary of like a movie is only fun if you're the customer. The big Apple marketing reveal demo is for the customers, but they don't do those kind of presentations internally when talking about the work. A documentary, like I said, documentation is after the decision's been made. Documentary is talking at people. This is how we did it. This is why we made this decision. move it or lose it. Like you're going to watch Avatar or not. Like it's like it's either for you or it's not. Instead of trying to give the behind the scenes documentary, which is having work speak for itself, try to develop a fan base. And how you develop a fan base, you share your point of view, you engage in critical dialogue. Like I think a lot of designers are afraid of debate. I don't like debates either. And I don't debate. I negotiate. And when you think about a captain of a sailboat, they're not debating the water, they're negotiating the conditions. The hydrofoil sailboat, the captain's looking at the horizon, they're judging the wind speed. And what's crazy about hydrofoil is that as you're negotiating the waters, once you get to the same speed as the wind, it doesn't feel like there's wind because you're moving along with mastered the conditions. You've negotiated all the different variables that are impacting your ability to transport yourself somewhere with a boat. There's no more wind. You're moving with the tide.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. So like I negotiate. Okay. Like
Cool.
I try to treat like me engaging in critical dialogue, which it might look like a debate from the outside, but for me, I'm trying to like look for obstacles. I'm like, okay, so what you're saying is this. Okay, well, you seem upset. I think the book Never Split the Difference is like a masterclass on how to negotiate rather than debate. Because debate's about having a winner or a loser. It's finite thinking. Negotiating is, I plan on sailing my boat tomorrow as well. I'm trying to stay in the fight. I'm trying not to crash my boat. And so engaging in critical dialogue and having a point of view, that's how you develop your brand, because you get known for what ideas that you keep repeating over and over again. And some people want to be liked by everybody, but that's not how design works. Like you're finding your target audience. Hopefully your fans are executive sponsors that like love your ideas, love your thoughts. And then when you present a solution, they trust you so much because they're such big fans of your ethos that your work looks like it's speaking for itself, but you're speaking for your work. You're advocating for your work.
Behind the scenes.
Because you did the legwork.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So like that's the thing that a lot of people like this idea of having a fan base. I think this is so important. And this is something that I think a lot of junior designers especially, they assume the work will speak for themselves, like you said, but it won't. You need to have other people speak for you when you're not around. And having that fan base at work, those are advocates, those are allies, those are sponsors, like you said, people who are willing to go to bat for you. But they won't do it because the work is great. They're going to do it because they like you and your methods, or, your output is obviously high quality. That's important as well. But, speaking of craft, like you got to be able to do those things. But also, you've done the other things. You've been able to have those conversations and do all that stuff and negotiate, just like you said. Negotiate the troubled waters of, to use your analogy, of corporate America or the workplace or whatever it is, because it is constantly challenges everywhere. It's never going to go smooth. You're never going to get the double diamond like you see in the books, like perfect, diverge, converge, step 1, 2, 3, boom, good UX. And I think that's something like so many junior designers just assume, they're going to be able to do that and out comes great software at the end. And that is not at all what it's like in the real world. Cool, man. Yep. So this is awesome. I love it. Before we get out of here, I got some questions I like to ask all my guests to help my listeners get to know my guests a little bit better. We got some questions we're going to hop into. Before we do that, tell everybody where they can find you. Give yourself a plug for your show and all that other stuff you got going on.
Yeah. So my podcast is Way of Product, and it's a labor of love to help craftspeople who want to develop better product sense and taste, get good at all the things we just talked about. It's more about like the philosophy. I don't really like to talk about what are the top 5 Figma plugins or like the tactical stuff. I don't like to talk about the discipline. I believe that product development is a liberal art. You have to be competent in at least a few disciplines to really crush it in product development. You need to also be like conversationally fluent in other people's disciplines. Like you should understand how code works and how a database schema is created, not so that you could create one, but so you could communicate with your engineers. You should understand the language of business, communicate with executives and product managers. You should master, 3 complementary disciplines, stack the skills, and then be conversationally fluent in a lot of other disciplines. And you're going to be the next Hans Zimmer in product design. And so I believe that great products, they speak for themselves because they have fans. Great products don't need to be marketed. They don't need to be sold. They are sold by the fans. And if you don't have free word of mouth marketing, your product isn't great yet. And so follow me on LinkedIn. I write about that stuff. I also post daily clips from my podcast there. I have a TikTok, Caden Damiano on TikTok, where I show a ton of podcast clips there. But everything you could find at wayofproduct.com.
Right on. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes. And yeah, we're talking about very similar things. So if you're a fan of this show, if you're a fan of Beyond UX, you're going to love The Way of Product. So make sure to check out Caden over there. And we'll have all those links in the show notes. All right, Caden, first up, man, what is your favorite non-design book?
There's a couple. Man, that's a really hard question. I'll share the two one that has been most impactful in my career recently, which is the 48 Laws of Power and like the laws of human nature. Like Robert Greene's books are great because it's like an ethnography of the first principles of like what power is. And people will say like, oh, that book's dangerous or whatever. Like they don't even let prisoners read it in prison. But the whole thesis is like you understand like the dynamics of power in politics. I think more designers should be politically savvy,
yeah,
not in the sense that like, you're a politician. Really, like, guys, politics is just the discipline of getting things done with other people. That sounds like collaboration. If you're collaborating, you're doing politics.
Yeah,
and
man.
So that book, very impactful. The second one that I'm like currently reading right now that has made me feel something, like it made me emotional, is Invisible Cities. It's kind of an allegory using the framing of Marco Polo and Kublai Khan. I'm a big fan of Venice. But it basically talks about seeing human desire in your mind's eye using the metaphor of cities. And it's like Marco Polo like talking to Kublai Khan and telling him stories about all these cities that aren't real. But it sparks Kublai Khan, who was probably the ruler of the known world for a while in Marco Polo's time. He was a conqueror. He expanded. He was, in the business context, it's a great allegory on business where it's like about grow, 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 grow. But then the inside of the empire, doesn't matter how large it is starting to crumble because there's no infrastructure, there's no humanities, there's no culture in the empire. Like there's no shared culture, and so it's doomed to fail. In these conversations with Marco Polo, inspires him to start making the inside of the vessel stronger. It's a beautiful book. It's like prose and poetry. Yeah, it's fantastic.
All right, what is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something you've eaten, something you've ate at a restaurant.
This episode is brought to you by Huel. I don't eat breakfast. I usually do like the Huel like high protein powders during lunch because I like what I do and I work a lot. But dinner is where I go to town on my COVID hobby was cooking, and what meal that's made me feel something is either like tacos or like a steak at like a nice steakhouse like Ruth's Chris. And so I spent COVID, all that time I wasn't commuting. I was learning how to make like the perfect steak, reverse sear, sous vide.
Oh, nice, dude.
So a good steak with like some French fries. The sear is perfect. It's perfect temperature. Is like something that I look forward to.
I love it, dude. What is the technique? What did you figure out? What's the perfect technique?
I started out with sous vide. I use a Joule sous vide. Mm-hmm. That basically, to anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's you put the meat in a plastic bag. I think we've seen, like, if you watch The Bear or any like chefs shows, you're basically putting it into a bath at the temperature you need it to be, and it'll take it up to temperature. It takes a little bit longer, but then when you pull it out of the bag, it's ready to go. It's also great, like it's an alternative to smoking. So I make brisket in the sous vide, and then I use liquid smoke to create the smoky flavor. And you could break down really tough like cuts of meat like chuck and brisket over 24 hours in that bath. It's great. But for steak, it's reverse sear, where you use like a Bluetooth thermometer, like a meter, stick into the steak, and you put it into the oven, you bring it up to temperature, and then you take it out of the oven, and then you just sear it. Boom. It's great.
Oh, so you sear it afterwards. Oh,
here's a great engineering to tie into the show. You know how Ruth's Chris steaks are so good is because the founder, Ruth, was a chemical engineer, and she invented a broiler technology to get their steaks that way. Okay. So they invented like hardware to cook their steaks that way. So they
really?
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Not a lot of people know this, but Ruth's Chris from New Orleans. That was first one was down in New Orleans.
They respect.
There you go. It was Chris, and then Ruth bought it, so it was Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. So that's why it's
smart.
Anyway, it was originally Chris's Steakhouse, Ruth's Chris's Steakhouse. Anyway, very confusing.
And then and Ruth made it into an empire because she was an engineer.
Yeah, there you go, man. I love that. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
I like Prof G Pod, like Professor Galloway. He's pretty famous, like pundit on.
Okay.
He wrote The Algebra of Happiness. He just seems like he's kind of like that old crotchety mentor you never had. So like if anyone's like needs career advice or just how to like navigate life, Prof G is great. I like Tim Ferriss show every now and then. I listen to a lot of comedian podcasts like Mike Birbiglia is Working It Out. If you want to be like a great designer, the whole premise of the show Working It Out is that he's just working out jokes, which is like design studio. You're jamming on ideas. Comedian podcasts are great for getting better at design.
I love that, dude. Actually, that's so funny. Like so it's his stand-up routine that he's like working through on the show, and like you kind of hear him.
Well, no, he's like it's like a podcast. He's interviewing, and he brings on like his like fellow comedians onto the show, and then they're just talking about.
Oh, okay.
They're talking about the craft of comedy. It's like this. It's like this show. It's like Beyond UX, but for comedians. And then they're also like testing out jokes.
That's awesome.
And like getting critique from really like their peers on jokes.
I love it, dude. I'm gonna have to check that one out. I was telling you not long ago, washing dishes. That's when I listen to all my podcasts. That's maybe tonight I'll fill it up and while I'm washing the dishes and check it out. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
If I want to reflect, it's like some old town in Europe. And something that's like a really cool, like meandering, walkable city so that you could just
put
a podcast in or audiobook and just like wander. A couple of my favorite places recently have been Seville, Sevilla, if you want to be pretentious and say it in Spanish. And then, and that was like my personal offsite. Like, it's kind of funny. My wife, she's amazing, super supportive. She lets me do solo trips where I could kind of do like reflection every couple years. And so I did that by myself, did a road trip in Spain just by myself, just listen to audiobooks and thought.
Wow, dude.
That's one of my favorite. And then obviously if it's with my family, it's, staying somewhere for like a month and just bringing the kids with us and just doing our normal routine somewhere else. Like Mexico, we did that. Like,
that's cool, man. That's
my wife's family's from Mexico. I get to just be myself and normal, still go to the grocery store, but it's all in Spanish, and the food's amazing.
That's really cool, dude.
So
yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. I love that, dude. I'll have to get your wife to talk to my wife to figure out how we can convince her to let me do a solo trip. Yeah. That's really funny, man. That's awesome, dude. I love like your own personal offsite. That's really badass. I love that idea. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
I like my Remarkable tablet. I like to export like PDFs of like PRDs or like technical documentation or like the persuasive essays executives write on like what they think the strategy should be. And then I like to just load it up in my Remarkable and mark it up and identify so like object-oriented UX is like my favorite tool for like identifying what people want. And basically here's a really cool pro tip. Just read the transcripts of your interviews with customers or internal people. Like that transcripts are pretty easy to come by nowadays with AI. And you just identify subject, noun, verb of the sentence. And so it's like, this person needs to update this noun. I'm like, oh, cool. That's a requirement. So
that's a smart idea, dude.
Sophia Prater, have her on the show. She's a genius.
Is that one of the things she recommends?
Yeah,
that's cool,
it's called noun forging.
Yeah, I've been following her for a while, and she's on my list. I got like a nice little backlog, but her and then Joe Natoli, who is also like kind of partnered with her on some of that object-oriented UX stuff, known for other stuff obviously as well. But yeah, I got a bunch of people on the list, man. Mitch is on the list. Mitch is on there. I've just got to get like through my backlog and, do all that stuff. So awesome, Caden. Well, man, it's been really awesome talking to you. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate you coming on. One more time before we get you out of here, tell everybody where they can find you. Give yourself a plug one more time.
I'm going to spell my name out because people don't know how to spell it. It's a CADENDAMIANO, Caden Damiano on LinkedIn is probably where we're going to get the most interactions from me. And wayofproduct.com is where you could subscribe to the show. And find it on your favorite podcasting platform.
Right on. And we'll put all that stuff, like I said, in the show notes. Check it out, beyonduxdesign.com. Caden, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you coming on. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Talk to you soon.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Caden and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on how you can get your time back as a designer. And remember, it's not about clearing your calendar. It's about making those calendar invites more impactful and more meaningful and making sure that you're actually getting what you need out of that time. It's not all about just having no meetings at all. But have you tried any of these techniques that Caden shared today? I'm curious, how did it work out for you? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you can imagine. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes, unlock the secrets of UX success, and learn all the things they didn't teach you in school. Use the promo code LISTENER for 10% off your copy. Just head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book and pick up yours today. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free. And you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes and even episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access to the video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. Remember to sign up for the newsletter. Check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, what are you going to say?
Go ahead. No, you go first.
Okay.
I insist. When you're a fan, you like the behind the scenes stuff.